And here we are. It's finally here, boys and girls. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga collection. And I'm here today to review it. I have purchased it on both the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 5, which also is obviously the PlayStation 4 version as well, bundled in there with it. So what do we have? Well, first off, we've got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles original arcade game, as you can see here, which is one of my favorite arcade games of all time, an absolute classic. Also, we've got Turtles in Time, which was a game I never actually got to play in the arcades, so I'm super excited to share my thoughts on this when I do a full playthrough of it. Then, of course, we've got Turtles 4 Turtles in Time, which is the Super Nintendo version of that said arcade game previously. Now, a lot of people consider this the superior version. I personally actually prefer the arcade version. And then, of course, there's Tournament Fighters on the Super Nintendo. Look at this game. Oh my god, I cannot wait to get into that game with you guys. Hyperstone Heist on the Sega Genesis. Oh wow, what a game. Something that I totally missed out upon, and I'm really enjoying playing it. We got Tournament Fighters on the Genesis. Now, a lot of people underrate this game. It isn't as good as the Super Nintendo version, but I do like certain parts of it. So I'll be getting into that later at a certain point. Then, of course, there is Turtles on the NES. Again, this is a game that has so much nostalgia with it that you either love this game or you hate it. It's something that you've had to grow up with. Then there's obviously the arcade game, which is the NES version of the arcade game. I personally think this is one of the highlights of the collection. This has turned out a lot better than I ever thought it would. Then, of course, we've got the Manhattan Project. Oh my god, I gotta be honest with you guys. I think this might be one of the best Turtle games ever made. I think the Manhattan Project is an absolute little 8-bit masterpiece. It's so playable. Then we've got Tournament Fighters on the NES, which is the fighting game from the Genesis and SNES, but in 8-bit form. It's a bit of an oddity, this one, but again, I will get into it in more in-depth, and you guys will understand what I mean. Fall of the Foot Clan. Okay, now this game is an absolute Game Boy classic. Now, for those of you who didn't grow up with the Game Boy, obviously it's monochrome graphics, black and white, but this was one of the best ones on the Game Boy. Back from the Sewers, this was one I never got to play back in the day, so I've had a quick go on this, and I have to say, I really enjoy the controls on this. Nice big chunky sprites. Very good game. Now, this was probably my favourite one on the Game Boy, Radical Rescue. I think Radical Rescue, still to this day, is the best handheld Turtles game. I really do. I mean, if you don't include the Switch versions, obviously, but the original handheld versions. This still, to me, is the definitive one. So what does the game collection actually have? Well, there's a lot in there. Aside from just all the games, you've also got a lot of extras. So as you can see here, when you delve into what all the search filters have, you can have advertisements, you can break it up into game boxes, you can have the game manuals. There's so much you can go into. I'm going to show you the game boxes today as part of this review, just to give you an example of what extras are on this game. So when you look at the artwork for these games back from the original inceptions of what they were, you can really see here what they were working towards in terms of trying to get the public aware of these games. And I think 90s box art is something that is really indicative of what's coming back now, especially with the advent of games like Shredder's Revenge. What this collection does is it adds not just hyperbole to the games that you're playing, but it adds a lot of in-depth research into not just the makings of them, but the pre-production of them. So the designs of the games, the designs of the characters, what they were going to look like, preconception of the original arcade game. I mean, you can see here from some of the box art for the old NES games and the Super Nintendo games, the difference between the Japanese and the US and European releases. I mean, look at that for the Tournament Fighters and the Super Nintendo. That's what I remember. That's the box art I remember. But there's just so much. That front cover there is what I really genuinely remember. That's a big favorite of mine. These games really are a time capsule, and if you're not into seeing how games have evolved over the years in terms of not just the technology that they were built upon, but also the gameplay mechanics. I really don't think you're really going to appreciate just what the leap in technologies we've had over the years from these initial conceptions of the Turtles up onto what we've had throughout the years up until Shredder's Revenge. I think Shredder's Revenge is a perfect footnote to all of these games here in this collection, and I think it perfectly complements this collection. Now, in terms of graphics, well, obviously there's a big variation. The graphics in this game are obviously a combination of 8-bit, 16-bit, and then obviously the arcade games. So you're looking at pretty much the technology that was available at the time in the arcades was a little bit above the 16-bit home machines. Saying that, Turtles of Time on the Super Nintendo, a lot of people consider it better on the Super Nintendo than the arcade. Like I said, I still think the arcade version has got slightly better graphics. The actual game itself, I can see why people maybe think there's a little bit more content in it on the Super Nintendo version. And definitely the soundtrack on the Super Nintendo version, wow, they did a great job with that. But then the Super Nintendo had a great sound chip. But yeah, so in terms of graphics, I think this collection it's a real homage to a specific place in time that we all remember as retro gamers. People from my generation, I think, really remember this as the advent of the arcade really coming into its own, when arcades suddenly became almost like the cartoons. I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, which is on this, the first game that you play, that was the first time we'd ever seen an intro from a cartoon in a game, you know. And the next one after that was The Simpsons. And Konami really nailed that aesthetic of bringing the feel of a cartoon into a game. And I think they really carved a niche in the market for themselves there, you know. And I think that's what this is a celebration of. It's a celebration of why these games were such a seminal moment in video games. And I think when you look just back through so much of this, what you realize is not just the graphics, but the sound design was really at the top of its game, not just in the arcade games, but in the 16-bit versions as well. Even the Genesis version, which a lot of people would consider didn't have as good sound as the Super Nintendo version in terms of the Tournament Fighters games, I actually think the Genesis version has a lovely soundtrack. And when you look at other games like even the Manhattan Project here on the NES, they're really pushing 8-bit technology. So you're kind of mixing and matching between what was really pushing the envelope on both 16-bit and 8-bit. In terms of gameplay and lastability, I think this collection has it all. I think it's got something for everyone. If you're into adventure side-scrolling beat-em-ups, you've got the Manhattan Project. You've got the Turtles arcade game. You know, very much in the vein of Final Fight, very much in the vein of Streets of Rage, all those kind of games. You know, this was the inspiration that this game had. So you've got to remember not just the influence that these games had, but what influenced these games before it, you know? So in terms of what I think this has to offer to people that don't have any memories of these games, I still think you're going to enjoy this. I really do. And that's why I would give this collection a sterling 100% 10 out of 10. And the reason I'm giving it a 10 out of 10 is simply because I think it has everything to offer every single age group. So guys, if you get a chance, go out and get this collection. It's absolutely brilliant. And until next time, peace out.